Someone you love is going to die. You already know this. You have always known this. And when it happens, you will probably do a version of the same things people around you have always done. A funeral, a burial, flowers, silence, a gathering afterward where nobody quite knows what to say. But for 99% of human history, none of that existed. What ancient humans actually did when someone died is one of the most surprising, most human, and most misunderstood stories in all of archaeology. And when you understand it, something shifts. Not just about the past, about what grief is, what death means, and why your body responds to loss the way it does. Start with the oldest evidence we have. In a cave in what is now Iraq, in 1960, archaeologist Ralph Solecki made a discovery that would divide the scientific community for decades. He found the remains of a Neanderthal, buried in a pit, surrounded by dense concentrations of flower pollen. 8 species of flowers, clustered around the body, placed there deliberately. The site was called Shanidar Cave. The individual became known as Shanidar IV, and Solecki argued that the pollen was evidence of a burial ritual, that Neanderthals, a species often dismissed as brutish and primitive, had placed flowers on the body of one of their own. The debate about those flowers has never fully resolved. Some researchers argue the pollen blew in naturally or was carried by burrowing rodents. Others maintain the clustering is too deliberate, too concentrated to be accidental. But whether or not the flowers were placed by grieving hands, what is not in dispute is this. Shanidar Cave contains the deliberate burial of a Neanderthal who had survived for years with a withered arm, a blind eye, and severe leg damage. Someone had kept this individual alive. Someone had cared for them. And when they died, their body was placed in the ground. That is not the behavior of a species that did not understand death. That is the behavior of a species that felt something about it. Go further back, further than Neanderthals, into a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, where in 2015, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger discovered something that rewrote the textbooks. Deep inside a nearly inaccessible chamber, reachable only through a narrow chute that a grown adult could barely squeeze through, they found the bones of Homo Naledi, a small-brained, small-bodied hominin that lived at least 250,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. The bones were not washed in by flooding. They were not dragged in by predators. The only way into that chamber was the same narrow passage that Berger's team used, and the bones of multiple individuals were there, deliberately placed, in a location that would have required significant effort and intention to reach. Homo naledi had a brain roughly the size of an orange, smaller than a chimpanzee, and yet the evidence suggests they were deliberately depositing their dead in a specific, hidden, difficult-to-reach place. Long before Homo sapiens walked the earth, something that looked almost nothing like you was doing something that looks almost exactly like what you do, handling the dead with intention. This tells you something profound. The impulse to mark death, to respond to it with behavior beyond simple abandonment, is not a product of civilization. It is not a product of religion. It is not even a product of modern human cognition. It appears to be something far older, something embedded so deeply in the social architecture of hominins that it preceded language, art, and symbolic thought as we understand them. But what did that behavior actually look like for most of human history? For most of the time our species has existed, burial was not the primary option. The earth is hard. Digging is slow. And for nomadic groups moving across landscapes following food, leaving a body in the ground meant leaving it behind entirely. So the earliest Homo sapiens did other things. Some groups practiced what anthropologists call sky burial, placing the body on an elevated surface, a rock, a platform, and allowing the elements and scavengers to return it to the landscape. This was not abandonment. In many cultures that practiced versions of this tradition, the scavenging of the body by birds was considered a form of release, the dead becoming part of something larger. Other groups practiced defleshing, carefully removing the flesh from the bones through deliberate cutting, often preserving the bones afterward. Archaeological evidence of this practice appears at sites across Europe and the Near East, going back tens of thousands of years. Cut marks on human bones, placed in patterns inconsistent with cannibalism and consistent with careful, methodical processing. The bones were often kept, curated, carried, passed among the living as objects of memory or power. In some cases, the skull was given special treatment. At a site called Jericho, dating to roughly 9,000 years ago, archaeologists found skulls that had been plastered over, their features rebuilt in clay, their eye sockets filled with shells. These were not anonymous objects. They were portraits. They were attempts to hold on to the face of someone who was gone. Think about what that means. 9,000 years ago, a human being sat with the skull of someone they had loved and pressed clay into the bones of their face, trying to make them look like themselves again. The technology was different. The grief was identical. And then there is the evidence of extended presence with the dead. Across dozens of archaeological sites from the Paleolithic through the Neolithic, researchers have found evidence that bodies were not immediately removed from the living space. They were kept, sometimes for days, sometimes for longer. In some cultures, the dead remained part of the household, literally, with bones incorporated into the floors and walls of dwellings. The dead did not leave. They stayed. They became part of the structure of the place where life continued. Bioarchaeologist Darlene Weston has studied skeletal remains from sites where bodies show evidence of curation, deliberate handling, rearranging, and reburial long after death. She argues that for many ancient peoples, death was not a single moment, but a process. The relationship between the living and the dead did not end at the last breath. It continued, transformed, through a period of transition that the community managed together. This is a radically different model of death than the one most modern people inherit. In contemporary Western culture, the body is typically removed within hours. Professional services manage everything. The process of handling, of sitting with, of physically being present with the dead person is largely outsourced. The transition is fast, efficient, and largely invisible. But your nervous system was not built for that model. Your nervous system was built for the older one. Grief researcher Mary Frances O'Connor at the University of Arizona has spent years studying the neuroscience of bereavement. What she has found is that the brain does not immediately accept the permanence of death. It continues, for a period, to search. The neural circuits associated with reward and motivation, the same circuits that activate when you expect to see someone you love, continue firing in the absence of that person. The brain keeps looking, keeps anticipating, keeps preparing for a reunion that will not come. This is not a malfunction. O'Connor argues it is the expected behavior of a brain shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of social living. In ancestral environments, the temporary absence of a group member was far more common than permanent loss. The brain learned to search, to call, to anticipate return, because most of the time, the absent person came back. Death broke that system, and the breaking took time. It required a process, the extended presence, the rituals, the community gathering, the repeated return to the body or the bones, to help the brain slowly update its model of the world, to learn, through accumulated evidence across days and weeks, that this person was not coming back. Ancient burial practices were not primitive. They were, in a very real neurological sense, exactly what a grieving brain needed. When you sit with the body of someone you love, something happens in your nervous system that does not happen when the body is taken away immediately. When a community gathers and tells stories about the dead, something happens that does not happen when grief is processed alone and in private. When rituals are performed, even rituals that seem arbitrary or symbolic, the nervous system receives a signal. This is happening. This is real. This is being acknowledged. The anthropologist David Graeber argued that ritual is not merely symbolic, it is functional. It does something to the people who perform it. It coordinates the nervous systems of a group around a shared reality. It makes the unbearable, over time, bearable. Your ancestors understood this without understanding it. They did not have the neuroscience. They had the practice, accumulated across thousands of generations of loss, refined by necessity, preserved because it worked. What you feel when someone dies, the desperate need to be near people, the instinct to touch the body, the inability to simply move on, the hunger for ritual even if you cannot name what ritual you need. is not weakness. It is not dysfunction. It is ancient. It is the response of a nervous system shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of loss, reaching for the tools that loss always required. Someone you love is going to die, and when that happens, the oldest part of you will already know what to do.